Michelle Rhee is the Chancellor of the D.C. schools, and she was earlier recruited by Teach for America to teach in Harlem Park, Baltimore for 3 years. She founded the New Teachers Project, a nonprofit organization that helps recruit and train new teachers for high-need schools. In 2007, Mayor Fenty appointed her the Chancellor of the schools and has since implemented multiple initiatives aimed at improving Washington, D.C. public schools.
Good afternoon, Chairman Miller, Ranking Member McKeon, and members of the committee. I'm honored to testify today about mayoral governance and closing the achievement gap. Considering the great challenges of D.C. public schools, we are fortunate to be the new kids on the mayoral governance block, and I'm grateful to the leaders in New York and Chicago who have created incredibly strong models for mayoral governance. We've already been able to apply their lessons for reform to the unique needs and promise of Washington, D.C. I've been proud to work with urban public school systems across the country for the last 15 years and for 1 year now as the Chancellor of the D.C. Public Schools. Last summer, I entered a system that showed a 70 percentage point gap in achievement between our poor minority students and our wealthier white students. We are the only district in the country on high-risk status with the Department of Education, and only 9% of our entering freshman class graduate from college within 5 years. I entered a system in which 1/3 of our schools had proficiency rates lower than 20% in either reading or math. In other words, 4 out of 5 students in those schools, or about 14,000 children, were not even meeting the most basic levels of proficiency. In a district that is 81% African American, this is one of the greatest institutionalized injustices imaginable. The old ways of addressing this long-standing injustice have not been working. No matter how difficult, the solutions to these problems must be radical and unprecedented. Many have asked me why, considering the severe dysfunction of this system, I would take on such a challenge. In fact, when Mayor Fenty first asked me about the possibility of my appointment as Chancellor, I declined. But it was not for the reasons that you might expect. I have met enough students in this district to know that their proficiency levels do not reflect their ability. I know firsthand from speaking and working with students that our poor and minority kids have the aptitude that rivals anyone. Rather, I knew that I would not be able to create a system that was strong and just if I had to bow to the adult and political priorities that have prevented progress for children for years. I was not willing to lead a system that asked children to wait another patient moment while adult priorities and timeline diminished students' life outcomes. When I raised this concern with the mayor, his response was clear and immediate. Education was his first and highest priority. He would back our students every step of the way, no matter what the political cost. I knew I was talking to someone who knew that the health and vitality of the city was dependent on the quality of education delivered to its children, whose skills would be critical for driving the city's progress in future years. Now, after 1 year as Chancellor, under the mayoral governance structure, I see even more clearly that it takes tremendous courage to stand by this kind of commitment. The deepest and most far-reaching results will be seen long after a leader has left office. With this in mind, placing self-interest and preservation behind student needs may be the most difficult and human challenge of every publicly elected official. But to truly honor the letter and spirit of Brown versus Board of Education, it is absolutely necessary. I can unequivocally say that without mayoral governance and without a mayor who is willing to prioritize educational reform, no matter how muddy the political waters become, we would not have been able to achieve what we have in the past year in D.C. public schools. For years in school districts across the country, school boards, sometimes led by principled and competent officials, have had difficulty making deep reforms that have equalized education. They are bound by the political tug-of-wars that blocked swift action. Many superintendents have similar ideas to mine regarding school policy and education reform. In most cases, they know the same best practices that I do, and they know the research that tells us what will be most effective. And they also know that they would apply these practices to meet their own district's needs, but they do not have the adequate authority to assess their students' needs and take action to meet those needs. They spend much of their time jockeying with school boards who are as bound to politics as they are to the interests of children. Despite good intentions and the hard work of competent professionals over the years, this structure is one of the reasons that 54 years after desegregation, we still struggle to achieve justice in education. What is it about this governance structure that can enable us to change the tide? First, unlike most superintendents, I report to a boss who knocks the barriers out of the way. He runs political interference when necessary and has not flinched once in supporting a decision that I felt was in the best interest of kids. Under mayoral governance, I believe we can finally reverse the long-standing failures of urban public education. In many ways, DC is a microcosm of urban public education systems across the country. As our most pressing challenges exist on a national level, reform here can be used as a model across the country. Second, one of the most striking challenges we face in Washington, D.C. and in other urban districts is the complete and utter lack of accountability. This year, I met students who appealed to me about teachers who didn't show up to class. On one occasion, one of my staff members took a call from a teacher who had applied to teach summer school. After 20 minutes of conversation, the teacher told my staff member, "Hold on, I got to go dismiss my kids." And he knew at the time of this phone call that he was talking to a member of the Chancellor's staff. In another example in the fall, I learned that one of our employees had failed to fill out one form for a special education child, and for another child had failed to conduct a meeting. Her mistakes resulted in a $500,000 cost to the system, when by law we had to provide those students with private placements. I called that employee into my office to ask her what had happened. I said, tell me a little bit about why, because you failed to fill out the form for one child and failed to have a meeting for another child, you cost this district $500,000. And she replied to me, "You need to understand that I have a very difficult job. I have too much to do, and sometimes things are going to fall through the cracks." I replied to her, "Well, no, you need to understand that if you are going to have this job, you have to take personal responsibility for ensuring that everything within your job purview gets done and gets done well. If you're going to take the paycheck home every 2 weeks, you have to take that on." And she replied to me, she looked at me very puzzled, and she said, "Well, that's not very fair." So this was the kind of culture that we were actually dealing with in the public schools. And at that time, I did not have the authority to make this employee and others accountable for meeting their job responsibilities. As a result, the mayor and I lobbied for a change in the law that would allow us to convert central office school district employees into at-will employees. With the support of the D.C. City Council, we became better able to ensure that our central office employees are now working within the best interests of students. Also this year, we created a new performance evaluation system, and because many employees who had been with DCPS for years had never formally been evaluated. Already, the combination of these two actions has begun to change the culture to one of accountability and professional striving. Third, like many other school districts, DCPS has historically had a culture driven more by politics and adult concerns than by the needs of children. This tension is especially clear during the discussions of school closings and consolidations. In D.C., the previous superintendent, after an extensive period of community engagement, released a master education plan in which multiple collaborators concluded that due to under-enrollment, it was necessary to close schools. The community agreed that it would save the system millions of dollars that could be redirected towards classrooms. Yet, even for schools that are not performing at high levels, few families wanted their schools to close. And because elected officials must often serve their constituents in their particular ward, even in cities led by mayoral governance, a debate ensues in which everyone agrees that schools must close, but few politicians want to close schools in their own jurisdictions. Fortunately, with the backing of our mayor, we were able to address this under-enrollment by effectively closing 23 schools in the district and redirecting those resources for next school year. Next year, for the first time in the history of Washington, D.C. public schools, every single school in the district will have a librarian, a music teacher, an art teacher, and a physical education teacher.